banter about chemical weapons has been going on for over a year now. The U.S. Saying that it's got a red line on their use and accusations flying about their use. A high-level source, actually, within the opposition, told me that he was approached by the U.S. State Department with a cash offer in terms of bodies of supposed chemical weapons attacks in Syria, and that he believed that those fighters died due to accidental discharge of makeshift chemical weapons that the FSA have themselves created. And there's been actually examples of the FSA, which is the rebels or insurgents, which is a more accurate term for them, have been using makeshift chemical weapons in Aleppo. And Channel 4, Alex Thompson covered this, and many people, many civilians were hospitalized as a result. But it wasn't sarin because the symptoms didn't have the telltale signs of that. There was also videos that came out, and I think InfoWars covered this as well, of rabbits being killed by the FSA who were mixing chemical weapons. Mm-hmm. So there's some evidence that the FSA themselves are manufacturing their own chemical weapons and using them. The reason that this guy in the opposition didn't go along with this U.S. State Department request is he wasn't convinced of their intentions to really intervene in Syria, because they have never said that what plans to intervene, but perhaps they just want to set a precedent for real chemical weapon use, and the end agenda being to just further create more destruction. Because if you let the rabbit out of the hat, then that's it. Then it increases the likelihood of chemical weapons really being used.
Syrian girl, were you able to hear? I think we got an echo going back on the line there, but were you able to hear the interview that we had with Sibel Edmonds earlier?
No, unfortunately, I wasn't able to.
Well, she had we spoke to her, and she had a very interesting take on both the Boston.
I don't think that Russia is going to make a deal that sells Syria out, not at this point. I think that there's definitely something going on with Chechnya being labeled as the culprit behind the Boston bombings. I mean, the reason that Russia is supporting Syria at the moment is because there's some very radical Chechens coming across the border into Syria, and they just started their own platoon. So to radicalize the Caucasus and the Middle East threatens Russian sovereignty. And when I say radicalize, I mean create like an Islamic extremist ideology in its posture, like they did with Al-Qaeda. This is a threat to Russia, and this is what's happening in Syria. So, of course, Russia is going to oppose. That's one of the reasons Russia is opposing U.S. presence in Syria. Now, as for a backward deal, it's possible.
The reason she said
Boston bombing with the brothers. From the evidence I've seen, I have doubts that these guys were Islamic extremists at all. Mm-hmm. Just by the way that they dressed or the way that their Twitter feed was, it's really doubtful.
And that's very important, Syrian girl. Can you elaborate on that? Why you have doubts?
Well, if you look at the dress of the Al-Qaeda style of terrorism, this might be superficial, but they usually have a beard and no mustache. Mm-hmm. And that's because they follow a very specific sect of Islam called Salafism or Wahhabism. Mm-hmm. And this is the case, if it's not just a beard and no mustache, then at least the beard. And neither of the two brothers had that. And it just seems bizarre because it doesn't fit the bill of what,
exactly. Alex has pointed out that they
come from, I suppose. Mm-hmm. But
yeah.
For Russia making a backdoor deal with the U.S. regarding Chechnya, I don't see Russia selling Syria out. Just the position that they've taken up to this point is very hard to back down from. Mm-hmm. It won't. If anything, if they sold anything out, it wouldn't be full-blown intervention. I still have my doubts that it would come to that. So perhaps this is more to do with political pressure. This claim is coming also at a time where the Syrian military has been making sweeping advances in both Damascus and Aleppo, and it could just be a sign of desperation. And in the first place, the claims are coming out of Israel, and that's not exactly a neutral party when it comes to Syria. Syria and Israel have been enemies since Israel's inception. So after the United Nations went through and found no chemical weapon evidence in Iraq, the US attacked anyway, and then proceeded to use chemical weapons in white phosphorus over Fallujah in Iraq. So really, this whole thing is not about chemical weapons. It's not about humanitarianism.
Right.
It's about finding a way in.
Tell us a little bit about the charges last year and how that boiled down. Can you kind of recap that for our audience?
The charges last year of chemical weapons use.
Yes. Yeah. The charges, the allegations of chemical weapons use last year.
There has been so many allegations. At the beginning, there was just some threats issued by the US, in case you use chemical weapons. And there was one, I'm not sure if it was last year, it was a few months ago, where there was a few hundred injured civilians in Aleppo that had inhaled some kind of gas. Some of them had suffocated to death. But the gas itself wasn't sarin, which is the most likely weapon that Syria would possess. And that's not the symptoms. So I suppose none of the accusations have been able to stick. And I think this is another one of those. I mean, what evidence do they have? Chuck Hagel said that, at the beginning he was saying there isn't enough evidence. Many examples of children being used as soldiers in this war. You'd think that the crew of Invisible Children who made Kony 2012, that propaganda, to have some comment about it. But
and I was talking a lot about that a couple of weeks ago on the InfoWars Nightly News, and I was like, where are all the Kony people who were so concerned about a guy who many of the people in Uganda say has been dead for 6+ years, or at least been missing. But, we see this child with playing with explosives and AK-47s, and nobody cares about that.
It's actually, I've seen examples in the mainstream media where they kind of made it heroic or, understandable that the rebels were using child soldiers in Syria. It's repulsive. But I did want to make a few last points about the chemical weapons that we were speaking about before. One thing is that, again, the claims are coming out of Israel in the first place, but Syria isn't signatory to the Chemical Weapons Convention. So in the media, when it's claimed that Syria is breaking international law, it's completely false. And another country that isn't signatory to the Chemical Weapons Convention is Israel. So it's ironic that this information comes out from them. But Chuck Hagel, at first he was saying that he was in disbelief about it, but then he said, the direct quote was, the decision to reach this conclusion was made in the past 24 hours. So it's kind of like saying he decided to make a conclusion. So the conclusion wasn't made based on evidence, but political expediency. So finally, I did want to say that if the Syrian military were to use chemical weapons, then why would they use it on a small scale as is claimed here?
Right.
Wouldn't that defeat the purpose of chemical weapons, which is to cause mass destruction? Wouldn't it be simpler just to shoot the insurgents rather than use these small-scale chemical weapons? So it's really a bizarre claim, and there's no evidence yet whatsoever. And even if they're coming up with evidence, it could just as easily be the FSA who have been using it, for which we have evidence of. And, again, it's just more excuse to create war, just as it was in Iraq.
Absolutely. Exactly. When we see these kind of claims come up.
Yeah, I mean, they've been funding them since the 80s. Al-Qaeda is the biggest tool in the Middle East for the US, and it's become blatantly obvious. I did want to make a comment about the first article where the one Iraqi spy led to the 100,000 deaths. It's funny because there was a BBC article about that said the Iraqi who fooled the world. But you know what? The world wasn't fooled. the U.S. government wasn't fooled. The UK government wasn't fooled. They knew very well there wasn't any weapons of mass destruction in Iraq.
That's
the
right.
UN told them so. So to put all the blame of the war on this one guy and his supposed false claims,
oh, absolutely,
it's just ridiculous.
I think, though, the point is that here is a guy who
Assad government, lots of things to try to, blacken my name and my message. If I did have a bit of airtime left, I would just like to say, the manufacturing of claims of chemical weapons is still going, and that source that gave me information from inside the opposition did say that the US State Department approached him with false information about chemical weapons to try to make him the one to come out with it. So it's still happening. It's like regurgitation of the old tricks, and even in all.
All right, that's all the time we have, Syrian.